Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Carter. My name is Amanda Blake, and I'm the Director of Education, Library, and Visitor Experience here at the Carter. And I just want to thank you all for joining us tonight for our Artist Talk with Shin. And thank you especially to our members who are in the audience this evening. Your generosity helps make the Carter free and open to all. If you are not currently a member, I encourage you to join after the talk by visiting the membership table right outside the auditorium or through the website. I would like to thank the Art Bridges Foundation Access for All program for their generous support of Second Thursdays at the Carter. Every second Thursday, you can connect with art through cocktails, conversation, and creativity. Each month, you'll find something different, from performances, artist talks, and unique tours, to art making, music, and films. I hope you'll join us next month on April 10th for our annual Drink and Draw Second Thursday. It's really fun. It's a popular one. We want to especially thank the Alice L. Walton Foundation Temporary Exhibitions Endowment for their support of Shin, the museum body. I would also like to thank the TCC Sign Language Program for their partnership with the Carter. These intern students and faculty are an ongoing presence at our talks and other public programs, and I'm thrilled that you all are here to support our talk today. As a reminder, if you haven't already, please take the time to silence your cell phones. So I have the pleasure of introducing a great friend, Maggie Adler, the Carter's former curator of painting, sculptures, and works on paper, and she is going to introduce artist Shin.
Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back on this stage and with all of you. Many of you know working on this project with Shin was the last project that I did at the Carter. So this is like my cameo appearance. It's like a bad penny. I just keep coming back. And I'm just thrilled to be here with Jean today. Shin is known for her sprawling and often public sculptures, transforming accumulations of discarded objects into powerful monuments that interrogate our complex relationship between material consumption, collective identity, and community engagement. Often working cooperatively within a community, as she's done here, Shin amasses vast collections of everyday objects: Mountain Dew bottles, mobile phones, 35mm slides, clothing, while researching their history of use, circulation, and environmental impact. Distinguished by this labor-intensive and participatory process, Shin's creations become catalysts for communities to confront social and ecological challenges. Here she has turned her attention to the labor of museum work and the people who make this museum what it is. Born in Seoul, South Korea, and raised in the United States, Shin works in Brooklyn and in the Hudson Valley of New York. Her work has been widely exhibited and collected in over 150 major museums, kind of not bad, Jean, and cultural institutions, including solo exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which is where I first encountered her work, the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C., and the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, where she was the first Korean-American woman artist featured in a solo exhibition. Shin has received numerous awards, including, for us old history painting people, the Frederick Church Award for her contributions to American art and culture. Her body of work includes several permanent public artworks commissioned by major agencies and municipalities, most recently a landmark commission for the MTA's 2nd Avenue subway in New York City. She is a tenured adjunct professor at Pratt Institute, an extraordinary teacher, and holds an honorary doctorate from the New York Academy of Art. And she is represented by my really good friend, Ingru Chen, from Praise Shadows Gallery in Brookline, Massachusetts. So please join me in welcoming Jean to the stage.
Thank you so much. Realizing that this mic doesn't work, we're going to extend it down here. It's a pleasure to be back and really in conversation with Maggie, and also to be back in the space of the museum body today. But to kick off our conversation, and really a special treat for me to think about this project, I thought it would be helpful to do an overview of my work real quick. Just wondering. Okay, great. So, we're revisiting a project that I did, one of my first museum exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art. And so that is incredibly special because we start to think about how my work starts here, has evolved, but continues to be an important thread in my work. So this exhibition was my first show in 2004. And when Maggie and I decided to have a conversation about what work to do, I realized, oh, wait, it's 20-year anniversary of my being an artist and showing at museums. Well, that seems like a good occasion to start celebrating this work, but also revisit some of those ideas. So this first project, I invited museum workers to donate a clothing. And the special relationship I had with this was I was also a museum cultural worker working in the curatorial department of the Whitney Museum. So when I would put together exhibitions by other artists, when I was an emerging artist, I knew for sure that the artist was not the only person whose work was really on view. It was the behind-the-scene, unseen labor, unacknowledged labor of creating an exhibition and art experience. So when I had the opportunity to have my first museum show, I said, well, what else? I know the space, and for most people, they think of art like Picasso. Let's go run to see the Picasso. And I'm like, huh? So for me, it was really a delight to imagine, let's go see art really for the people, by the people, and those are the people who work at the museums. And similarly, I took that journey to a permanent site. GSA, the federal government, asked me to do an exhibition, a permanent commission. And in that vein, it was the same thing. Oh, these are the people of the federal government who come and get services, and that is naturalization and citizenship. I had a very specific relationship because I actually got my citizenship in this exact building. They also have veteran services. Again, let's think about the services that the government does. Lovely topic. And how important they are. And how our histories are intertwined with that. And so this is actually me procuring and inviting immigrants to participate because that was my history. My family and I immigrated through literally this building and gave that same oath that I will be citizens of this United States. But I am not from here. And I really love that journey that people make. And that is the history of America. And then veterans, of course, make a different pledge and they leave this country to hopefully fight for peace. And I thought of these ideas, how clothing maps these journeys, maps their identities, personally, but also collectively. This is an exhibition that I did at the Asian Art Museum. And I was thinking about the notion of Asian societies and also Asian Americanness. So in this exhibition, I received sweaters that I unraveled. And each participant's body was dismantled through a thin line that I could reconnect with their friendships. And again, back to museums and community, it's really about people knowing people, getting the job done, inviting others to reconnect. And so these threads are so important. And I think we'll see and talk about that further with Maggie when we get on stage. Other exhibitions that I've done really deal with everyday objects. And so these are detritus, losing lotto tickets. Has anyone encountered those on the street? And then have you ever thought, maybe that person didn't win, or maybe they just didn't win and they left this ticket behind and you're picking it up. So I always thought the potential of something that could, in our imagination, be so rich, and the desire to imagine an epic dream, right? But in reality, we're all losers. Little losers, a dollar loser. But we're back the next day to scratch. And I really thought that imagination of the desire to win, right? But at the end of the day, it is the labor. These are not glued. So it is a house of cards. So it's a laborer that actually realizes this. It is not some fantasy and not rigged systems in the lottery. So I'm always thinking about how these objects tell different stories than the one we expect, The losing lotto ticket actually tells that you believe and you come back every day to do that work. These are trophies. This is a show at the Smithsonian American Art. And I was like, DC, we have these monuments. To whom? Question mark. So starting to think about, well, what space and reference do I love in DC? And to me, it was the National Mall, because it's empty. And you fill it with the people's desire, whether it is to protest what's going on, or to celebrate when someone like Obama hits the stage, or, so there's so many times when people need to get together. And that, to me, was a perfect monument. So these trophies were transformed from sports to everyday labors. And of course, that is everyday heroes. So I'm always trying to think about how we can recontextualize the things in our life that seem so trivial and not that important, but actually really does say so much about our culture. And then there's other streams, other obsessions, technology. We're obsessed with technology, but every generation has been. This, everyone says, is our vinyls, but they're not. They're 78s. So it's really like grandparents' generation. And so it's the passing of a life, a whole generation of music listened to by a man. So it's very much how objects are like portraits as well. So here it feels like the greatness of a life, like big tsunami wave, but then it crashes and we're back to the cycle of life, the ephemera, just like the music technology as well. These are 35 millimeter slides. Again, for those in this room might be, yeah, I know what they are. The next generation, of course, imaging has just dematerialized. And so I was really thinking about what we lose when we go from like the analog to the digital, and how we forget to browse, we forget to really look, because there's no physical, what we say, barrier, but actually the physical love of having things in our life. And so I imagined, what is this cloud and the immersive nature of that. Of course, these are 35 millimeter slides from the Metropolitan Museum. So I'm always interested in archives, especially at institutional level. Even they decide that they no longer need to save their slides. For me, the Western canon isn't the only reference to be inspired by, and spaces like gardens. So that's the Zen garden that I've rematerialized and understood as a dystopic space, because we're no longer looking at scholars' rocks and meditating quietly. We are staring at our phones. And so these kind of messages about what we're paying attention to. And so the Scholars' Rocks were reinvented to think about what's distracting us from actually paying attention to nature, to ourselves, to our lives. And I have these e-bundles where you get to kind of sit with this landscape and contemplate where we've been in the last 20 years since mobile phones have been introduced. And I then have ventured to other waste streams. And plastic waste is just as prevalent, if not worse, than the e-waste that you see. And I question the cost of these convenient things. We use it and discard it. It's important to us, and yet there are other options we choose not to do, because as a culture, we just use and throw out. But unfortunately, plastic waste doesn't degrade. One plastic bottle takes about 400 years. And it's not a plastic bottle anymore, but turns into microplastics. So there's just this endless cycle that ends up being in our landscape and mostly in our bodies and our marine life. So these are the collaborations I do with, when I work with institutions. In Iowa, they have lots of cornfields. So I took that subject right on about agriculture and the American landscape that's transformed by pesticides and fertilizers, and yet they have no art teachers. So the museum educators go to the school system. So I just invited them to make a Gene Shin sculpture with me, with Mountain Dew bottles that they consume. So again, it felt so threatening to me that this drink was called Mountain Dew, when there are no mountains, and that dew is not exactly fresh and natural, but toxic, addictive, and leading to lots of diseases. So this is both an ecological problem and a health issue. And it stems from growing too much corn that we don't eat, we don't need, it's subsidized. So I thought we'd take this corn landscape to New York City. This is the Winter Garden. And then we entered a space of fantasy because there's palm trees here. Why are there palm trees in New York City? Because as a consumer, you can get anything you want, including being in a landscape of palm trees. And so what would be native, growing indigenous maize, is not there in New York City. We're sort of in a food desert. So this is like a mirage of plastic waste that seems to appear like one thing and promises another, and then gives us something else. And so really, what is the true value of these objects? And even in my workshops, these detritus, which is the ends of the 2 little water bottles, the Mountain Dew bottles, then end up becoming other invasive installations. And we worry about invasive species, but really plastics is what we should be most worried about, and they are taking over. And we don't see it. And we're so interconnected globally, so one person may be consuming in one part of the earth, and here we are in Kenya with a collaboration with a Stanford collaborator who does infectious disease, and they're surrounded by water but don't have access to water. So they have water bottles that are, again, thrown out and in their landscape. So we made a big tsunami wave of water bottles to show that this must change because they have the most beautiful ocean, and yet they cannot have safe drinking water. And we have plastic waste. These are other collaborations. The scientists also wanted to do an audit of their plastics. Again, they have a past because apparently they're saving the world, but also killing us in the labs because everything that they do is now moved to plastic waste that doesn't get recycled. So I've been talking around ecology, kind of what the impact of these everyday objects have on our environment. And I had the first opportunity at Storm King to work outdoors in nature. And when I visited, it was a sad day because I realized the maple trees were dying. This is a maple alley, and half their trees were dead, and they had been removing and replacing them. It was too late for me to intervene. They had already made those decisions. So I decided to hold on to the bodies of these trees and make art out of it. I wanted to slow down the process of remembering these trees, even in their death, and that they would be transformed into a platform, a communal sculpture that would bring people together and to be in nature even at its most vulnerable stage and end of life. And I love that in a sculpture park where most things are made of quartz and steel to be permanent, this is a piece that slowly ages and has gone into entropy, but just enough for us to experience what that feels like and to be in remembrance. I also was curious what it would be like to taste these maple trees, and so I made maple syrup. Again, Storm King, as a storm park, doesn't do that, but it's something, of course, in New York, Canada, and all through historic times, the indigenous people knew this sweet sap that runs through maple trees. So it was an archive of the landscape in many ways, just like those 35 millimeter slides would have been for a museum. And here, once you do a one tree project, then people think that's your medium. And so I had other museums contact me, well, we have another dying tree. And in fact, trees are dying everywhere. This one is at Frederick Church, his estate and studio. And he had been planting these hemlock trees. So this one was close to his house, and they've been watching it die. When we cut it, we realized it was 140 years old, was very much the time that he built Olana, and he witnessed the hemlock trees dying because the tanning industry had arrived in the Catskills. So they were literally debarking these trees because the bark had the tannins to cure leather. And in that time, I witnessed these archives saying, "Oh my God, this is the most horrific death. You were literally skinned alive and left to die, and the entire ecosystem is gone." So I wanted to recreate this violence because I think we've forgotten what we've done, and then to create a second skin for them. And my skin was trying to understand two casualties, the calf. We love leather so much that we would do an injustice to both species. And so these are leftover leather, dead stock from fashion industry. I won't name some of the couture people, but you can see some of the beautiful colors that run through the runways. But so much is wasted. And I started to think about upholsteries and also heirloom furniture, none of which would have touched a hemlock. It was just not valued for that reason. So I decided to create a second skin, sort of a space that would be a shroud. And in this time, this is the pandemic. So I wasn't just mourning a tree, I was mourning our lives. I was mourning funerals and realizing why we come together. It's not really for the dead, it's for the living. And so it's really a sense of a saddening to be together, but it's an important remembrance of this life, right? And so this tree was really a metaphor for all that we have lost during the time of the pandemic. But there's still hope. In the forests of the New York State parks, there's little hemlock trees still growing, and they're not all taken over by the woolly agelgid, which is another insect that's eating their sap. So we tagged them, and so this is a project where volunteers really get to see and identify the hemlock trees in their landscape, and there's hope. But the big tree, when it was over, we had a big bonfire, the last goodbye and remembrance, and we moved it back into the space. But before that, I do a lot of prototypes in the studio. So we removed the limbs, and the limbs became sculptures. I also show them in galleries and museums, and so there's other second lives to it. And then the shroud, once it was removed from that tree before we did the bonfire, we held it, and I recreated a new piece, Second Skin. So these are, again, seemingly like remembrances, objecthoods that hold that story. The 1800s was a horrible time in America, maybe in the world. Hemlock trees were not the only victims, so were a lot of shell species. We discovered that we can make pretty buttons out of them. We call them the mother of pearl buttons. Real shells were sacrificed, and in fact, entire ecosystems were lost because we thought they were just gorgeous on our fashion. So if you wore them, it was a status symbol in the 1800s. And then I worked with the water department because they've realized that we lost species in our rivers all over the oceans as well, and they're trying to revive them. So they have hatcheries. And so I really studied their laboratory and the amazing work that they're doing behind the scene. And I wanted their laboratory work to be visible. So I created a fountain. These are hovering over a pier where I borrowed their 5-year-old freshwater mussels that were bred in a lab and introduced them to this fountain. And they're purifying the river. So the Delaware River flows through this pier and gets filtered by them. And it's a visible process so that we can really anticipate the transformation of the water health in the Delaware River. And then these are amazing scientists, teenage programs in the Science Museum who became our ambassadors and would give tours of the importance of this artwork, but also the important scientific work that's going on. I also wanted to show evidence of that loss. You know, when we talk about what we sacrifice for buttons. And little did I know, I'm very, very lucky, just like the Metropolitan giving me their 35 millimeter slides. I found a whole warehouse in New Jersey of their dead stock mother of pearls. So fashion industry after fashion industry, they were like, these are valuable, but there was no consumer need. We all went and abandoned them for plastics. So they were never opened. Again, they died, entire ecosystems, marine life, without any purpose. And so I decided to sew them back. So these are all hand sewn, return the bodies to sites of loss. And this is World Trade Center. So I'm recreating the waterways. We're in their space. The World Trade Center area is a landfill. So we should not be there. If we were not there, other species would be thriving. We'd have clean water. Manhattan is called Oyster Island because they were so plentiful. Now we're realizing they serve such an important ecosystem, not only to filter water, but erosion, and they're the keystones of any ecological marine life. So these are the kinds of projects I am now deeply involved in, thinking about, decentering our human presence and seeing the impacts that we have had ecologically, but what we could be doing to also help other species. So I was in the Ipswich area. There's an old farm called Appleton Farms in the 1638. And it's a very, very rich history. And most people go there because it's the oldest working family farm. The ecologists, though, love that it is home to a very specific species, the bobolinks, who nest in the grassland. So they come every summer and breed there. And so this was trying to really work collaboratively, again, behind the scenes, mobilizing the farmers to recognize that if I'm doing a project, I'm going to center it around this bird and its arrival. So we took dead trees in the fields, removed them, did a lot of tree service for them, looking at the old growth that were around the property, and then transformed even their rails, which were American chestnut. And again, plentiful in American history, served us so well. When they all died on the farm, they were milled to be fences. And now the fences were getting too old. So I replaced the fences, and to me, they became the structures for my sculptures. I also was thinking about farms and how I always think of old copper pipes. And so I wanted to salvage the history of farmland and agricultural life into these very strange, like Frankenstein perches. So my reinvented chestnuts are perches for birds. But I also wanted to make human perches. So I covered up and mended little holes from the old trees and created these sites where bird monitoring were happening anyway. They've been doing this work for 10 years, counting every bobolink that comes and nests in the grassland. So what I wanted to do was really hold that land so it's a visible habitat for the birds, as opposed to just an agricultural space. And then the birds came. And to me, it was the best audience to imagine that I'm in conversation and protecting the land because the sculpture was there. And for most visitors who are now going to Appleton Farm, they're going to say that we're going to see the bobolinks. And this migrating bird to me was such a beautiful metaphor for if you steward land, can you be a safe refuge for people who don't belong there, who come still and need a home, to have a safe place for raising their families? And then the notion of us all being part of that migration or the displacement. Oh, we don't have a mic, but there are really beautiful songbirds. And I think I will end here so that Maggie and I can have a conversation. pictures of the installation, the making of the museum body that I felt like you all should see, and it's a great chance to see the staff working. So we're just going to click through, and these will be in the
It's
background.
going to be moving by itself, I think.
Oh, I think we might have to click it.
No,
Perfect.
We got it. We got you.
And to me, this is like so beautiful to see you and I together, because that's how every project starts, with an introduction, an invitation, and to be in dialogue. And so I feel like this is a full circle to be in dialogue with you again, Maggie.
I'm thrilled to be back with you. Those of you who have been following this program through the years of how we've been activating that space, that gallery is really complicated because it's really a hallway. And it's a massive hallway, and anything you put in it looks like a postage stamp. And it is the point of the museum that everybody sees, particularly because most of you come in and then use the restroom. So you can't get to the restroom without going through that gallery. So in effect, it's the most prominent space in the museum, but it's the hardest to conceive of. And so years ago, we started asking artists to respond to the historical collection, to respond to this museum, and to make work based on what makes the Carter special. And it's been very successful. And so this space is special. And so I think we should start out with why you wanted to work in this space and how you saw it relating to your practice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It is special because to me, I saw it as a portal. You know, it connects one part of the museum to another, very different histories with the architecture in those spaces, and that this is the passageway. And you rightly say, everyone has to go through it. And so I love thinking about the portal, and just like that, like who should kind of be there, you know, to transport you. And really, it's the people, the employees who make your museum experience full.
Yeah.
You know?
I think, museums can be prohibitive spaces where people don't feel welcome, and you have a very sophisticated conceptual artist in Jean, but we all wear clothes. And so I think the experience that I had of people walking through, I'm not a sewer, but people who sew react to this. People who have given up a favorite T-shirt react to it. And so there's, I think, a democratic notion to what you're doing, apart from the who makes up the museum workforce, but how visitors are going to engage with the work.
Yeah, I've always been attracted to everyday materials for that reason, because you don't have to have a PhD in art history or be an artist to appreciate like any object, whether it is a T-shirt, it has a fabulous color or fabric texture, people just respond, know. But it's also incredibly accessible in the way that people understand this because it's their lived experience. It's also incredibly intimate, so it'll immediately evoke something, a very specific memory, when you go, oh, that plaid shirt, my ex-boyfriend had a plaid shirt like that, and you're going right there, So I just love that it is immediate when the response to this material. In digital form, it feels different than when you really are in that space and it's immersive.
Let's talk a little bit about how you engaged with the staff and the process of this and how this came to be.
Yeah, well, the engagement with the staff for me is an open invitation, and I really work with the stakeholders, right? And then you can kind of figure out how your museum structure works, right? At the end of the day, it is a question of, how does the curator, interact with the staff, right? And oftentimes, there are hierarchies in museums. When I did the project at the Museum of Modern Art, it was like the painting department is like king. Photography, not so much. Painting and drawing, prints, oof, or like the library and archives, oof, so people just had these strange hierarchies, and I wanted to break that down. Like every shirt is the same. You don't know whose role, whose shirt it is, what job they do. They are human. and they fill a space, And for anyone who's, like a fashion guru, like I'm just removing the seams to bring the soft skeleton above you, then the patterns are repeated, So it's a shirt, and again, those are complicated patterns for those who don't sew, but it was like, oh, there's a pants, and there's the pleat, and there's the zipper, and all those little day-to-day things. But to me, it was a pattern, meaning it's generative. Yeah. Right? This could be, again, one shirt. You have many shirts. But also for the museum, it's sort of like you play a role, but it's also dispensable, right? You're just filling up that space. When you're gone, it gets filled, right? So that architecture space is designed as a modular out. Okay, we've got to make a little adjustment, new space, new color, but it gets filled, So I did kind of think about that as well. These like modulations and units. I always work in units, but there's an idea that we're part of something larger, but the larger system works differently than a human system, an individual system.
And the idea of the museum body is a kind of unified whole, but then you see our individual tastes and roles within that larger entity. I think people don't know what museum workers do. I mean, when I say I'm a curator, they're like, "Oh, you hang the art?" Well, no, that doesn't. I choose the paint color, sort of. So I think it inspires those kinds of questions. We put out a call to the staff. Because we don't really wear uniforms. So it was very interesting to see what someone considered their uniform. And then we packaged them up and sent them to Jean and her studio. And do you want to talk about like some of the things you weren't expecting or comparisons between the Amon Carter and MoMA?
Oh, yeah. Well, we weren't expecting hats, like sun hats. Cheryl's sun hat.
Shirley's hat is iconic, so it had to be in there.
We just didn't specify enough that, sun hats, how do we deconstruct that? Like in New York, that's not typical of and of course the New Yorkers wear a lot of black. So we had a whole wall that was all black, not so much at the Carter, you know. So it was interesting, and of course the bright color of, a lot of people wanted to show, I guess, Carter pride, so they had the Carter Museum staff green shirt, or when you
Carter teal,
yes, that's right. So there was a lot of that kind of identity, but then those who chose something else, and I love that I want to be an individual as well as represent the Carter Museum, and those were incredibly meaningful to see, and just imagining the stories. And then of course I wanted the stories to be archived and celebrated as well. And so the video documentary was so critical to not only have the installation, but then bring the camera back onto that person so that they can tell their own stories about their contribution.
I think it was really fun because people had a lot of, we are all overachievers in this museum, so people had a lot of trepidation about how exactly they were going to submit something, and some of my colleagues were like, well, does it count if it just has a stain on it and it's not particularly meaningful to me? Of course it does. But what happens when they arrive to you in the studio, and how did you orchestrate this? Because I've never seen anybody plan more for an exhibition than you did.
Yeah, we could have another whole deck that, the work behind my studio, which are other assistants and interns who, each of these things are carefully marked so that we don't lose the identity. So it's all mapped together. And so the parts become, one shirt becomes 6 different pieces. And then we have the seams. And then we start to make it flat, so there's the starching, stiffening process as well. And so each of them are dried. So by the time your piece is done, we as a studio have touched your piece 25 times, because once it's dried, then we have to trim each piece. Once the trim happens, then we put the adhesive on, and then we take a digital photograph, and then it's like a picture digitally, so then I scale up the wall and put the pieces in. So we have this, you see these little pictures, and Maggie's like looking down at this picture.
I love a jigsaw puzzle. So this was like the
Exactly.
best jigsaw puzzle.
So we were like, which number is that? And where is that? And where does it go? So there's a lot of pointing and looking very carefully at our drawing, which is essentially the installation document. So we had this all pre-designed. It still took a lot of time and labor, but we weren't sitting there going, where does this want to go? That was all done digitally.
I think it's really interesting because a lot of this, I think, is an after effect of the pandemic and the choice to go a little bit more casual of a lot of my colleagues. So you see our the Carter's head of development Springsteen T-shirt. He wouldn't wear that to engage in a fundraising visit, but it was important to him as a garment. Prickles, the jackalope. I don't know how many of you know Prickles, who is involved in our family programs, but I kind of wondered, Prickles is small, right? So his staff T-shirt is about this big, and I wondered what Jean was thinking about it.
That confused me quite a bit. It's like, they have a infant who works here? Like, bring your infant to work day? I don't know. But also, to me, what was so moving, and you should tell your story about your dress, because, you get to know someone so deeply in ways that you don't expect through the projects like this. And it's the same thing whether I'm collecting prescription pill bottles and a friend gives me this pill and says, I have a special story that I want to tell you, and they really feel like, because now the transfer of ownership, you should know this. It's the same thing with the trophies. So I'm a collector of stories, and I love that. And it's like, it's entrusted to me. So these things aren't just stuff that people got rid of. No, I'm stewarding them and trying to tell and retell and hold on to their memories.
I think a leitmotif of your work is that care. I think people at this museum felt that you would handle their stories with care, in the same way that you handle the life of a tree or, the place for a bird to perch with so much care and kindness and respect. Well, I will tell the story since you asked. I really had a lot of trouble thinking what would be monumental enough to include in this work. And I noticed, Paul is here, right? Paul, our photographer, he said, I have listened to every single lecture you've given at the Carter because I've taken photographs of you. And I started to notice that I had hit a fashion rut. And every photograph of me giving a tour was the same Zuri dress. And you'll see it. But it was actually, Zuri is a company that makes really incredible garments for plus-size people, which I am. And they're like, we started showing up at events around the country, and all the curators would be wearing Zuri, so we started calling it the curator's uniform. I'm like an ad for Zuri right now. Anyway, so I showed up to an event at the National Gallery, and former curator from the Carter, Sarah Cash, had purchased a Zuri that she thought was too obnoxious in its patterning for her to carry off. And she said, who could carry off this level of obnoxiousness is you. So she sent it to me. And I noticed it's in every photograph. Every publicity photograph for the Carter was me in the same dress. And I thought, okay, I'm going to retire this dress from rotation, and I'm going to give it to Jean. That's perfect. And so I planned to do that, and so I went to New Orleans to give a talk for Emancipation show that we had at the Carter, and I thought that'll be its last outing, and then I'll retire my jersey. And getting back from that trip, I found out that my mother was in hospice, and I didn't have time to repack, and so I thought, okay, this dress is going in the suitcase. And it's probably going to be the dress I give my mother's eulogy in. And my parents were passionate about the arts. And I thought, okay, the lecture seemed like the farewell for this dress, but I can't think of anything better than to entrust something that meant so much to me and was my way of saying goodbye to my mom, than to make it into an artwork. So I'm honored that whatever I guess this is a good question. What happens to this after the Carter?
Yeah. So
I mean, I just told that story, so now you're going to be like, oh, throw your dress away.
No, but I also love that, like, you know, an article of clothing isn't just like you, right? And the same metaphor that these articles of clothing is about the people, right? Mm. And so the people are like a former curator, you know, whose legacy you're kind of following, and, you know, and having that exchange. And then, of course, you remembrance of your mother at this critical moment, you know, and that dress embodying all those things.
Yeah,
you know? So it's complicated.
Yeah, and it gave me a moment on that day that was just a terrible day to be like, okay, but there's something that's beautiful that's going to come out of this.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. And so for me, that clothing, it is still like a uniform, you know, and it's now part of this artwork. So it will forever be part of the work. I do think about what will happen in the next iteration if we do this again with another institution. Yeah. So all of them will be remade and re-cared for and repurposed, you know, to talk about like another, like what happens after MoMA 20 years later. There's Carter, you know, then I hope it's not another 20 years, but but it is true. Like I'm still thinking about all the colleagues that I met at MoMA during my first experience, you know, and Ava Respini being one of the curatorial, you know, visions. It was her first show as well. What's happened to all of us in 20 years? We've all keep moving around as well to different projects, you know. But I would also like to make different iterations of this project as well, you know, because this can just get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah. So we've said you live in New York. I mean, we live, you know, in rural New York, but also New York proper.
Yeah, Brooklyn style.
Let's talk about storage. What does your world look like? I mean, you have thousands of mother of pearl buttons, pill bottles, trophies, all this fabric.
Totally, I do. I have boxes and boxes, inventory. We just went through a lot of warehouses, and inventory is insane. But I also feel like it's somehow my responsibility, strangely. I feel compelled to hold on to them. And I'm not really a hoarder. Like, okay, I'm not the best at cleaning, but I like a clean surface. But it's mostly that this is not junk to me. And this is like a cultural history. The buttons are evidence of what we've done. And I think we need to be accountable to them. So just to throw them out, the problem doesn't stop, you know. In fact, we need to hold them so the problem can stop, you know. Us just throwing things out just means it's not my problem, you know. But it is actually a continued problem that just escalates to the point where no one feels that they are accountable to any of it, right? And so I am actually not accountable to these pearl buttons, but I've kind of made it my role. Yeah. To say, well, who else is going to do that? And when I took that warehouse, I was like, I don't have a warehouse to substitute your fashion industry's warehouse. So it's like, I will forever be the mother of pearl artist lady. Do I want to be the mother of pearl artist lady? Because I'm already the dead tree lady. You know? So it was a lot of those like, don't do this, right? Yeah. But then I felt compelled, I have to do this because who else will, right? And now I'm on a mission to say, if there's a marine site, call me. You know, like just like the tree thing, if you have a dead tree, approach me because maybe there's an art project. And I feel the same thing about coastal places, you know, we're in such a flood zone and climate change. These are all related problems. And I feel like it's a chance for me to return these shells back to public view, for it to be appreciated by people and to be sewn. And so that whole fashion statement of like, you know, there's a purpose to them. You know? So
you are shaping the next generation as a professor as well, in addition to a practicing artist. What do you tell your students and aspiring artists about the museum environment, the art world? Like, what is manifest in this? How do you kind of prepare them for what they're going to face?
It's interesting because for me, museums are a space clearly where I fell in love with art. I grew up in Washington, D.C., where I thought museums are free, which is great that the Carter Museum is free. But I just thought, D.C., it's like, and then I went to New York and was like, what? There's admissions? And it cost $20-something for me to see art. So it just didn't occur to me that art was collected, owned by collectors, and then somehow eventually they are given to a museum and on display. So for me, access to art was always available to a child, like me, who didn't grow up with art. So institutions are really sacred to me because that's where I fell in love with art, the best art. And so I do think about that, and that's why I continue to do these kind of engagements with institutions. But my relationship as an artist to institutions is not because of the place, it's because of the people. So it's the curators that I have relationships with. I don't have a relationship with the Museum of Modern Art. Yes, I showed there. Okay. It has a footnote, but my relationship is evolving, and the trust that's built in after doing a project, is epic, right? You never go back, right? So, and then they move on to other museums. I'm invited back, And so my feeling is that's how the art world works, through relationship building, So these organizations, yes, there's a mission, and you should really look carefully if that mission is aligned. And if it is, you'll find your tribe. You walk to a place that is like you, then, like everyone you meet, it's like, oh my God, I just met my best friend and we're going to be best friends for life. If you walk into the place and you're treated poorly, that will continue. And you will hate everyone you meet there. And you'll show the work and you'll get nothing out of it. Yeah. So I really just say, like, feel out a place, literally hang out and see, like, I like this person. Or you just get a good vibe, Yeah. And then really it's not about the organization more than, like, who did you meet? So an opening or a group show, I always say the group shows are the best because then you've met a cohort of artists. A solo show is complex because you're only there, right? But then I'm like, oh, then meet the staff.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I think you have, by virtue of the work, much more of a holistic view of a museum staff because you're not just engaging with the curator and the preparators and security and maybe education, but 50 people from this museum are your subjects and your co-conspirators.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're all here, and I just love how you saw so many different hands at work. I got to know them better through the working process, and it was just so incredible to see them literally light up because they were acknowledged, like they're physically acknowledged, but just metaphorically, people are saying, oh, what is an interpreter for public, blah, 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 what is a registrar?
Yeah.
What is, and I love those questions, like these are labors of love, Yeah.
Should we open it up to the audience for questions? Yeah. Are there questions for Jean or for me? Yes.
You started touching on this.
Thank you.
About what you do with your works of art after a show is over. And I really appreciated like kind of the deconstruction of the tree and the leather and, how it still had kind of another life for you. It had a purpose afterwards. And I realized that there can only be so much storage space. And does artwork always need to exist in its current form, sitting on a shelf, in a room, archived, or do you give thought to how you can deconstruct and repurpose things because you have quite a variety and complexity of mediums? And are there, I'm myself am kind of starting to appreciate that things that we have thought, whether it's quilts or, other kinds of things, instead of it being carefully preserved and sitting on a shelf, are there other ways that we can use it or look at it and by other communities or whatever? And I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, the storage is a big one. I do invite myself to reconsider any work. So, seeing that I had the archive of that MoMA piece 20 years later, I was like, oh, I can do it differently, And again, I'm going to invite myself after the Carter's done to be like, well, I know I'll make the ethical decision that honors that story, but that I'll also give myself permission to say, if you just hold on to it and save it for no one, or it just doesn't help. So how do I get the work out there, And again, how are the smaller iterations maybe dismantled, but still keeping the stories intact? So I'm constantly thinking about smaller scale, not museum scale. So at some point, some works are institutional works, and others I also think about how just to work with that, also in my storage. I think the regeneration is really important. The repurposing, I think that's what we should all be thinking about, just holistically. Nothing is permanent, and letting go also allows for other spaces. So this is similar to teaching or anything else. Is I want to make space for others, right? And so if my work is in the way, then I will make sure it's not, right? I think those are really important decisions to think about. What is your legacy? And your legacy isn't to hold on to things at the cost of, certainly not the cost of my creativity, and certainly the cost of my storage. But looking for storage, I ventured off to finding other lands, and so. Of course, secretly, I've got this 100-acre property that I exchanged because I had storage needs. I was like, I feel like if I can now store things, I'll be happier in that regenerative space than having to suddenly feel like I had to let things go and go through a traumatic experience. And so it's the whole notion about displacement, how do I provide space for myself to feel like it's still a space of freedom and a space for others, So, yeah, it's just think about these problems differently as I get older.
And just as a follow-up, how you've benefited also, whether it be from the pearl, buttons or whatever that other people passed on to you so that you could create your stuff.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for acknowledging that, because it's a generosity, literally, of the facilities manager in New Jersey who just said, take it. And I was like, is there an email? Do I show up? I was like, take it all. And I was like, really? And he's like, you mean it? And it's like, oh, you brought your car? I thought you were going to bring a truck. He was just I just know corporate doesn't even know anything about this. They're just one day going to say, and it may be a year, maybe 2 years, is it done? Clear it out. We're moving. We're out of New Jersey. And he knew it, and it went exactly as he thought. So he's like, I can't one button at a time or one box at a time distribute this. I'm not here. Right, this is not my full-time job. But if you were, willing to, but that gift, I told him he's my button angel. But that generosity is what I want to hold the spirit of.
I also have an antique pillow that's missing a button, and I said, Jean, could you maybe find me a match? I think there was a question over here. Subi.
This is really just kind of a simple question, but when you're commissioned to do a piece like you were here, does that piece belong to you or to the Amon Carter?
It's a contract question.
Yeah.
In this situation, it is commissioned, and then it's with me. But there might be other commissions that then it lives with. And I also do permanent commissions. So in that way, it's not exhibition related. It literally will be making a work that can last for a very long time, usually 40 to 65 years, depends on the organization, but with maintenance,
Yeah. It depends on the project for the Carter. Gabriel Dawes' piece was supposed to be temporary. It's not anymore. So sometimes these things shift. But of course, that space every year is something new. So.
Well, and I was really thinking, is the storage responsibility the Carter's?
Yes.
Jean, regarding this piece, which was in a different place 20 years ago, and because you can deconstruct it, it looks like it was assembled in a completely different way. Can you tell us something about what informed you to do it differently?
Very smart.
Yeah, thank you so much for that detail and noticing that. So at MoMA, I literally starched it on the walls, and I used laundry starch. I was like very young, so conceptually I was like, it must be wallpaper, it must be laundry starch. And they went for it. So I literally starched them. Then I had to peel them off. It was like, they're like really glued on it. So now I'm like, okay, conceptually it's laundry. We don't have to do that. But I didn't want it to be permanent. MoMA is not here. Their staff is not here. So I wanted to feel like there's this like kind of a scroll. You just unscroll them and there they are, you know? But it's not really part of this institution. So then the Carter pieces are stuck to the architecture because they are here, where they were here. Present
Back
company.
here.
You know, so the notion of a temporality was something I wanted to play with, and I'm working also at the Dorsky Museum, which is at New Paltz in New York State University. And so then I thought of the student body, which was actually one of the earlier iterations of this piece at Cornell, and I said, student bodies aren't permanent either. So impermanence has been an ongoing thing now that I'm working with nature. So then I'm like, oh, that student body, I'm making a whole curtain. So we're not attaching it to the wall. Because student bodies, they're only there for 4 years, in and out. Graduate program, 2 years. PhD, you know. But so the notion of this temporality, that you're very visible and you're a student body for that year or two, and then next. And then they keep opening that curtain back and forth. So I think about how collectives and bodies and identities are formed, and some of them are more permanent and others are more temporal by design.
There's kind of a practical consideration because that is the corridor through which everybody passes. So we can't have Jean installing in there for an eternity. So the Tyvek panels actually gave us the
So
ability
fast.
to have Jean come in, live her life without too much disruptions.
Yeah.
The colors of the way they're arranged looks very different from the previous instance.
Yeah.
Yes. It was
A
totally
gradient
redesigned.
this time.
Yes,
Yeah.
totally redesigned.
Are there any other questions? Great.
What's next?
Well, the Dorsky is next, for sure. And I have, in May in New York City, we're showing an independent art fair. And so you'll see the trophies, again, reconfigured in a much smaller size than the 40-foot pedestal of the National Mall. So there's a lot of exciting projects upcoming.
There was a question up here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just thinking of how to ask this. You seem to really think, well, I guess all artists do that, but you really think and use a lot of empathy, kind of put yourself in the situation, whether it's an object or people. And I'm thinking that's a lot of emotional work and must be really exhausting. And also trying to keep those stories alive with past exhibits and thinking about it. How do you do that? And recover from it.
Yeah.
You've done a lot of exhibits,
thank you.
150.
It's sort of interesting because I feel like nature has healed me, and people have healed me, and art has healed me. So those are all places that, they were my gateway to leaving places of trauma or things that I couldn't control. But in art and in nature, there was just so much inspiration, so much possibility. So for me, there's somewhere between I'm okay holding that story, because when you're responsible for something, you have something to live for. And there's a real urgency when you have that purpose. So I love that I'm driven, that every project has a story that's must get out. I must tell this story. Everyone needs to know about this. And every project that sort of the best ones, I go, oh my God, really? this is gold mine. Like, how is it that no one knows about this? This is a story that's forgotten, and we need this lesson so much. We need to hold on to that. So I don't feel sad and burdened by that loss, but I don't want to go to trauma. I want to get to like next transformation. What do we do with those lessons learned? How do we turn that leaf and empower ourselves, right? We can do something about that. Right? As opposed to just being in the empathy of, that's horrible. Oh my gosh. I think we're just in those shell shock, as we know, we're experiencing it in live form. That like, I'm exhausted. Okay. But I've got things to do is a better response. Like, I get the chaos. I can't control that chaos. I've got things I care for. So when I was a parent, I was like, I've got studio, but I've got parent. Okay, studio has to be efficient. Also, I need help. Child rearing, same thing. There's parts I can control, there's parts I can't control. I also need help. So just recognizing those balances. Some days are not as pretty as other days, but I'm also roll with it. Just like a lot of the work is about clothing that's not perfect. We don't fit. I mean, a lot of the clothing came from like, look, did you realize how short I am? But I'm actually exactly my size. It's just that American fashion standards are a little too big, right? So this notion of not fitting, or if you look at me, there's a reason that, white America tells me I don't fit the part. So the not fitting is like, I'm okay with that, move on. I don't have to stay with the problem. I just think the problem is going to be there regardless of what I do. So what are you going to do? And so for me, it's like, I'm going to change it. I'm going to change it from the institution out. I'm going to change it with the people. And so those are like, I'm so driven by that. So it doesn't really feel like I can sleep at night. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so nervous about these things. And it's like, okay, that means I'm alive.
Yeah. And we were all there to support you. That's 50 people who
It went
cared.
so fast. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I was like, we're done? Wait, we had 2 more days. It went really fast. And I could also see they were really loving it.
Yeah.
They were like really into it. Like it was not a burden to them too, and that's when, you're doing a good job because like we're on time, we're actually going fast, and you guys are up there like on the lift smiling and going, take a picture. And I'm going, this is great.
I think Andrew had a question, or you've...
Well, thank you, first of all, Jean and Maggie, for the presentation tonight, but also for your combined creativity to bring this wonderful experience, not only to those who helped make it, but for all of those that traverse it every day. My question is a little nerdy in a way, because what I'm struck by with when I walk through the space all the time, obviously every day, is there's an aesthetic quality to the wall piece, right? That is a little Ellsworth Kelly. There's a sense of form and simplicity and even minimalism. And then there's this Jackson Pollock above your head. And I just wondered, you haven't talked a bit about that aspect of the work, the sort of canopy. Just wondered if you could comment on that.
Thank you for that, Andrew, because I'm an art history nerd as well. And so we're just looking at some beautiful Ellsworth Kellys, and I've worked on silhouettes as well, and he's a big influence in how monumental you can work with others. And again, questions around the instruction and the labor and the people who make the work possible.
That very much showed in your planning.
Yes.
The grids and the charts.
You just have to follow the instruction. I don't even actually have to be here, but I care to be here and I want to experience it. So, so that part of that like minimalism and conceptual driven work is there, but also totally in love with like Eva Hesse and post-minimalists. So that's a huge influence. Like, oh, good, we got off the modernist thing and gone into something else, and then we're like, oh, it got really messy and gooey and yucky. I was like, yeah, that's life, right? So yes, aspire to the grid. Grid is here. Grid is going to work with you. And then it's like, So I did feel like that polarity is so nice. The fabric can be organized, and those who have need to do that, and those who are like, I don't really care for that, have this other place. And so different body typologies, but also, that's what it is. It's like the fabrics move with you, right? But there is a structure and symmetry. So I find that most of my life outlook is that there is a paradox and a contradiction. And if you look carefully, that's how it works. And whether it's the yin and the yang, those principles, it's the balance of those two things.
Or the skin and the skeleton in this case.
Yeah. The skin and the skeleton, yeah.
Well, thank you everybody for being here, and just a delight to be reunited with Jean again, and to hold each other in this collaboration, and just enjoy it. It's up through June, and maybe beyond. And thank you for coming tonight, and enjoy your cocktails.
Thank you.